Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of a two-part series on growth in Utah. I'm Derek Miller, President and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber. Whether you're a legislator, a local elected leader, or a community partner, we hope that the information that is presented today will be educational and useful to you as you make informed decisions. As all of us are very aware, Utah is growing at an unprecedented pace. That growth brings tremendous opportunities, but it also requires that we look ahead and plan ahead to ensure that the growth doesn't impact the incredible quality of life that we enjoy in this state. Today's event is jointly sponsored by Envision Utah, the League of Cities and Towns, and Wasatch Front Regional Council. We're joined by leaders from these organizations, as well as municipal leaders, experts, and practitioners. Our message is a unified one. It is time to exercise bold leadership in addressing the opportunities and challenges brought about by the housing crisis that we face. And make no mistake, it is a crisis. Today's agenda includes an overview of growth issues from Ari Bruning, Chief Executive Officer of Envision Utah. Ari will be followed with a discussion of the newly released report on best practices for housing affordability from Jim Wood, the Ivory Boyer Senior Fellow at the Gardner Policy Institute, and Ty McCutcheon, President and CEO of Daybreak Communities, with Terry Buckner, the co-chair of the Salt Lake Chamber Housing Gap Coalition, moderating that discussion. Following that panel, we will discuss the role of cities in planning for population growth with Cameron Deal, Executive Director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Don Ramsey, the Mayor of South Jordan, Mike Mendenhall, Spanish Fork Council member, and Jeff Silvestrini, the Mayor of Mill Creek. This discussion will be rounded up with a presentation of the Wasatch Choice vision by the Executive Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Andrew Gruber. With that, I'll turn the time over to Ari Bruning from Envision Utah.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for having me. Let's see if I can share my screen here. So housing is something that's a fairly unique. There's a marketplace where supply and demand applies, just like a lot of other goods that you can buy out there. It's also something that's a need that every one of us has. And it's also something that affects our quality of life in so many ways, in terms of the cost of living here in Utah, but also in terms of what kind of neighborhoods we can live in, how we can get around, even how much water we use, how resilient we are to disasters, so many things it touches on. And the reason we're having this conversation is this. We are a rapidly growing state. For the last 10 years, I believe we've been the fastest growing state in the country. And it's actually not anything new for Utah. We've been rapidly growing for a long time. And historically, a lot of our growth has been our own children and grandchildren. But the real reason we grow, whether it's our children and grandchildren staying here or other people coming to join us, is because we have a strong economy and we have a high quality of life. And that makes it a desirable place to live. And we're always going to grow as long as those two things are true. And the only way I know of to stop growth is to get rid of those two factors, to not have a high quality of life and to not have a strong economy. And I don't think that's where any of us want to go. Now, you might ask yourself, how is COVID affecting this growth rate? Well, it looks like, if anything, it's accelerating that growth rate. People are leaving other places and coming here. Long term, who knows what that'll look like. But that's the challenge we have. You combine that challenge with the fact that we're having a bit of a land scarcity now in some of our most populated and most urban counties where most of our jobs are. So Salt Lake County doesn't have a lot of land left. Davis County, even less. Utah County's got a lot more, but if you look at where it is, it's South County and it's over in Cedar Valley where Eagle Mountain is, kind of the next valley over. And that's an interesting point to think about. We have room to grow onto as we expand outward, but a lot of it's in the next valley over. It's in Tooele County, it's in Cedar Valley, it's in Summit and Wasatch counties. And we often pose the question in planning circles, do we grow up or do we grow out? And the answer is always, clearly, we're going to do both. But if we just grow out, the next ring out, now we're adding a 10-mile commute to that. And we're building in some of our places that have the best ag land. And this becomes a very tricky issue when we think about how we continue to grow and how we house our growing population. The other issue with continuing to grow that far out is most of our jobs are in those existing valleys that I showed. Salt Lake County's got almost half of the jobs in the state, and it only has about a third of the population. So we already have a lot of people commuting in. That puts pressure on our road systems, especially the bottlenecks between these valleys, and that affects people's quality of life in having to commute and so forth. Of course, if you're telecommuting, that may change the ballgame. So you look at the increasing population, land is becoming hard to come by. Those are two of the reasons we're seeing our housing prices increase much faster than incomes. It's putting a strain on anyone who's looking for a place to live. These are, Jim will probably show you more recent numbers than these, I don't know, but I think we're approaching $400,000 now for the average single family home. And why are prices increasing so much? Well, the first thing is we haven't kept supply up with demand. We've got a shortage of housing, and that appears to be across the spectrum, whether we're talking about apartments or townhomes or single family homes. Across the board, we've got a housing deficit. And if you remember your laws of supply and demand, if you have high demand and supply doesn't keep up, prices go up. Second reason is construction costs have been increasing very rapidly, outpacing inflation for a number of years now. It's hard to find labor to build homes and so forth. Land costs are going up. As I showed you, we have the decreasing land supply, and that means land costs in desirable places are getting pretty high. And then the fourth reason is government regulation. And when you think about the housing market, this is arguably the most heavily regulated market there is, aside from some controlled substances. I hate to pick on Bountiful. They're not here to defend themselves, but a pretty good example to think about. All the yellow on this map in the city of Bountiful is a place where it is illegal to build anything other than a single family home. And so when you think about that, in a lot of ways, we've made it illegal to build a housing supply that matches what people want and can afford. So the heavily constrained marketplace here, and that drives prices up as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So how do you accommodate all that growth with declining land supply in a way that maintains our quality of life and keeps it a great place to live? Well, we've done a lot of visions in a lot of different places in Utah, everywhere from statewide to small areas. And there's always a consistent theme that comes out of it as people look at different options for how to grow. And this visioning map that we just finished in Utah County is a pretty good example of what always seems to boil to the top that people view as something that helps them maintain their quality of life. And that's this idea of building mixed use centers. So you can see they come in different shapes and sizes. It could be a metropolitan center like downtown Salt Lake, or it could be something much smaller. Think of 9th and 9th or 15th and 15th in Salt Lake City. But they're places where you can live there, you can shop there, you can work there, and you can get around without a car in between those different uses. So in Utah County, as we modeled different scenarios, this rose to the top as what people thought would help them keep a high quality of life, accommodate the population growth, accommodate the need for additional housing types in these centers as well. And we have this moment in time where we have a pretty big opportunity to be able to build these places, partly because of the shift to online shopping, which got accelerated a lot in the last year. We have a lot of places that have surplus land that were retail before, or were parking areas. We're seeing parking areas being vastly underutilized these days, where you could add housing and turn it into a mixed use center. And then the shopping that remains is something that you can walk to that's nearby, and it's revitalized because now you have more rooftops next to it. So this is kind of a big picture solution for how to deal with this. Another example, we did a statewide scenarios exercise, and we took 4 different scenarios to people and asked them to vote on their favorite. 82% picked the scenario that had these mixed use centers in it. it's hard to get 82% of Utahns to agree on anything. So at a big picture, regional scale, in that kind of conversation, people see that as the solution for accommodating this growth. But then it kind of breaks down when you look at the local scale. I loved this quote in the newspaper that I pulled out, where somebody was objecting to a housing project near them, and they said, you know, we recognize that we have a severe housing shortage, but just not here, somewhere else, do it somewhere else. And you see that a lot where people, you know, the bigger picture, they get it. We need housing, we need these centers and so on, but, you know, just not near me. And the problem is when everybody says that, then you can't do it anywhere. And that becomes a challenge. And I'm sure some of the folks later on here are going to talk a little bit about how to deal with some of these challenges. And one way to deal with that is by having better discussions about growth issues and how to accommodate growth and what these challenges mean for us. And this is something that we've been working on for a long time. But rather than doing it this way, this is one way that we often do our planning. We decide what to do. We go educate the public about what we've decided. We announce the plan, and then we defend the plan. And we know what that results in. That means the plan doesn't go anywhere. You may have that city general plan in place, but the population isn't aware of it, doesn't care about it. Planning project or a development project comes forward consistent with the plan, and the pitchforks and torches come out. A better way to do that is through a much more robust conversation about growth. If we can get people involved in that planning and visioning stage to have that conversation, and then we can stick to what we decided was the best way to deal with growth, then things turn out better. And you know, this is the way we do it. We study Utahns' values. We bring stakeholders together. We do scenarios, future-looking scenarios to compare different options, ask people which way they like the best. And by the way, none of those scenarios involve keeping things the way they are because they can't stay the way they are. And then based on that input, that leads to a vision. So we need to have those robust discussions about this issue. So with that, I'm not going to dive into all the solutions because our next panel is going to dive into all the solutions. So hopefully that's a pretty good stage setter about where we are and the issues that we see. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Buckner, I think, who's going to be leading our next panel. So Terry.
Unmute. That's always important. Thank you very much, Ari. I appreciate your very thoughtful presentation. You've outlined some of the challenges ahead of us. And today, hopefully, we can have some discussion as to how best to address some of those. I'm Terry Buckner, co-chair of the Housing Gap Coalition. And I'm pleased to be joined by Jim Wood of the Ivory Boyer Senior Fellow at the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute and the Dean of all kinds of knowledge we need to have in regards to housing, as well as Ty McCutcheon, who is the president and CEO of Daybreak Communities. He's the boots on the ground to this process and how to work our way through it. And so I'm going to have both of you unmute yourselves if you wouldn't mind, and we'll bring you into a conversation. The Housing Gap Coalition was formed in 2018 when we saw projections for growth in Utah and recognized the gap in housing units we face, as well as the affordability issues that's causing the shortage. We've known about this issue for years, and many community leaders have been working to address it. So my first question, where are we now? How would you describe the current housing challenges our state is facing, and are things getting better or worse? Jim, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Terry, and it's good to be with you and with Ty. Well, 2020 was a terrific year for the home builder and for the realtors. Both set records in terms of new production and sales. But we also had a very rapid increase in prices again, double digit along the Wasatch Front. And again, this is really a reflection of our growth that Ari's talked about. And it is really an important issue, and I'm glad it's being addressed. It's something we need to discuss and make sure that we can plan for this growth and that everyone shares in the prosperity of the growth. But just go to the first slide, please. And this will show you the shortage. And you can see coming out of the Great Recession, we had 8 years, and those households are in the red and new residential units in blue. And you can see that households exceeded the new residential units for 8 straight years. If you go back 30 or 40 years, you'll see that typically housing units exceed new households by about 10% a year. And that's really the second home phenomenon. But we had this period where we're rapidly growing. We still had growth and we didn't get much in the way of new housing units. So in the last 2 or 3 years, we have caught up in terms of on an annual basis since 18. But we still have probably a shortage of, I would guess, 20 to 25,000 housing units for a healthy market. And that's really demonstrated by, we've got 9 years of vacancy rates below 4% in apartments. We've got auction wars or bidding wars for residential units, existing residential units, and builders are building as fast as they can and selling everything. What this means is pressure on prices. And just go to the next slide. Can you, okay, let me just a second. And quickly, I'll go through this, Terry. This is important. It shows just Salt Lake County, but it's similar throughout the Wasatch Front. If you look at the average wage for the last 5 years in Salt Lake County, it's gone up 25%. The median household income has gone up 28%. The median sales price of a home is up 55% in 5 years. And the monthly mortgage payment required for the median price home has gone from $1,742 to $2,400 plus, 39% increase. And the income required to buy to purchase the median price home has gone from $70,000 to $97,000, up 39%. That is despite a 25% decline in the interest rate. The housing price increases, of course, the property tax for those new home buyers and also their mortgage insurance. So even though we've had lower interest rates, we are not, our income is not keeping up at all with the increase in housing prices. Back to you, Terry.
Thank you very much. Ty, your comments.
Well, there's a lot to digest there. I think clearly the paramount challenge is the amount of housing that we're providing. I was thinking about the gap of some 50,000 housing units in the state and what that means and how we would close it. I think everyone recognizes that within Daybreak, we offer a very diverse set of choices for housing. In this last year, we expect to deliver over 1,000 for sale homes and about 300 plus apartment units. So you think about that type of supply into the market to close the gap across the state. All of the projects and all of the developments throughout Utah would need to continue building at the pace they are. As they sell out, new developments would need to be replacing them. And on top of that, we would have to create 5 more Daybreaks and have them sell at our rate for 10 years to close the gap. So it's a astounding number that we need to ultimately supply. And as Jim alluded to, we've detached now wages and house prices. You know, historically throughout the history of Utah, the two have moved fairly closely together. As in most healthy markets, they do that. There are a few very expensive, high-cost markets around the United States where, you know, some decades ago, the wages and the house prices became detached. And that's a dangerous place for us from an economic perspective, because part of our competitiveness is the ability for individuals to be housed at an affordable price. And so I think what we want to explore today a little bit more is, you know, how do we increase the overall level of supply sufficiently to allow that relationship to be restored But at the same time, think about the individual techniques we can use to keep each house on its own a little more affordable. So it's both challenges, in building more efficiently and affordably, but also just increasing the absolute supply to the order of magnitude that I just discussed.
Thank you, Ty. So clearly we have a problem. Clearly it's got some issues we have to address. Now comes the real test for the two of you. What solution do we got? How do we confront this, Jim?
Well, what, Terry, that's a difficult issue, and we
That's
did.
why I turned to you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's why I turned to you.
Oh, I thought you said, okay.
So,
Well, I spent the last year in the literature and talking to 35 practitioners to find out what they thought were some of the most effective local practices that would help with increasing housing affordability and also produce some affordable housing. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And from our survey of 35 practitioners, these were the 5 that they settled on. Really, and some of these were almost a consensus. And in our report, and I hope all of you have that, I think Chamber sent that out, changes in zoning, very important. Almost every best practice depends on changes in zoning or friendly zoning. Preservation of existing affordable housing, that has been undertaken for some time, particularly in Salt Lake County by the county and the city, and some nonprofits as well. Transit-oriented development, there's been a lot of infill and high-density housing built around some of the TODs, and that's a plus. Some communities that might not have developed high-density housing when they have a track stop or a front runner stop have done that. And accessory dwelling units, those are very popular as a concept. And there is, I think, some legislation underway with Representative Ward on that. We do need some, we need to bring some uniformity to that concept. And then the redevelopment agencies through tax increment financing have helped to provide over the years millions of dollars for affordable housing, particularly in Salt Lake County or Salt Lake City. Their RDA has been very active. So in the report, we go through each one of these and say why it's an important, explore why it's an important practice and how it was implemented, the framework for implementation, and then give some examples of local use of that practice. So I hope that's helpful. And again, these are quite general. There are complexities and intricacies in every one of these that imaginative cities do use. And that was interesting to see how some cities have used these concepts. So back to you, Terry.
So conceptually, there are 4 or 5 areas that we can use some work on. Ty, let's talk practically. Let's talk about what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, I think you've done a great job of identifying a range of tools that we need to be pursuing each of these. And I think the point I would share is that as we do that, it is not just a flip a switch and then they're done. These are all going to take a lot of heavy lifting at the local level. I'll give you a few examples. So ADUs, I think we would all say, well, this can't be that incredibly hard. We take a portion of an existing home or we take a space in the rear yard and we create a new housing unit. The uptake on it has not been as fast as we would like to see, I think, but it does hold a lot of promise. A few of the issues we're seeing as we go to implementation, and a lot of cities are experimenting with different approaches here, and commend them for that. But some of the things that are starting to pop up that are making it a challenge, some cities are evaluating the need for off-street parking for these additional units. So it's hard to figure out, well, where are you going to put a car on a lot if that's a requirement to add an ADU to your existing home. So we see that in some jurisdictions. Another one that we've seen recently is some cities are looking at their impact fee schedule and wanting to apply the full schedule or a substantial part of that schedule to the ADU itself. And so the whole idea behind the ADU is to take, existing housing and existing infrastructure and leverage that. But we really lose the benefits if we start piling on additional costs through fees to create that housing unit. So those are some of the challenges that are going to need to be worked through as we think about implementing on the ADU as a concept. In terms of preservation, I think this is a great one. We do have a lot of housing stock that is tired, but that is affordable. And so it is much more efficient to preserve those units as they sit today. And so all the efforts to fund those through public-private partnerships, through tax increment, through grants, this is something we should continue to look very seriously at to keep them in that more affordable space. We talked about zoning, and I think Ari's chart and his map really alluded to the problem. There are several markets around the country where the solution is simply to sprawl, and it's less politically challenging because there are no neighbors. So you take peace out on the fringe and you subdivide it and you start building houses. As a region, we've made a decision to try and be more thoughtful and build within shorter distances to our existing infrastructure. The challenge comes that becomes politically a more difficult conversation. And so when you're trying to push the supply through the system like we need to, the effort that goes into having those conversations takes time. And our local leaders will be able to speak to this as well, that folks show up and say, gosh, I love the idea, I just don't think it should go there. And so when we have so many of those situations, if it's never anywhere, then it's nowhere. So I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have to grapple with is how do we implement the plans that everyone says conceptually at the regional level we want, but get buy-in and stick to them. Maybe the last thing I'd say on zoning is I think we've allowed the conversation to go to an either or, all or nothing kind of an approach. We don't have to deliver mid-rise or high-rise apartments to solve the problem. Most people still want to live in a detached home, and there are very creative ways to deliver detached housing. Even in Daybreak today, we still sell probably 60+% of our homes as detached homes. They're just on different lot configurations, different lot sizes. And that can be troublesome and concerning to folks who are used to measuring lot sizes in acres or fractions of acres. So when you start talking about a couple 1,000 square foot lot, you end up with that same concern around, boy, I don't know what that will do to my neighborhood or my property values. But I think we have enough evidence to suggest you can do these things. We just need to accelerate the dialogue and get to implementation so we can meet the demand and build the housing units that we need.
Perfect. Thank you. So my next question then comes down to, these are a lot of local issues. A lot of local boards and mayors are trying to deal with these things. But what have you seen from a state basis that has worked? What kind of things have states, not only our state, but other states done that have helped give municipalities some backdrop, some strength, to some tools to be able to manage this process? Jim?
Well, thank you. Over the years that I've watched this issue of housing affordability and affordable housing, it's been primarily in the arena of nonprofits and local government, and generally using federal dollars. And in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a real shift, I think, statewide in, or at least at the legislature. We've now got the legislature involved. We have some nonprofits involved. We have the chamber and the business community, and then local government. So we have a consortium, really, and those 4 groups or those 4 entities are really need to attack this problem with, I think, education, incentives, and then most important is political will. The state has done a couple of years ago, they got involved in the homeless issue, which is really important. They've spent about, I think, in appropriation, something in the neighborhood of $70 million on the homeless issue and to build new facilities. So that was a step forward and introduced really major spending by the state into the housing issue. Then in 2019, we had SB 34. Unfortunately, we didn't get any money that year from the legislature, but we did get some policy with, we had some incentives, SB 34. I think most of you are familiar with that, and it tied some housing affordability policies and programs to transportation dollars. And we aren't sure how that worked out yet. The first submission for all 83 cities, which they all did submit, that was in December. In terms of compliance with what was required and talking to workforce services, it looks like some of those cities didn't fully comply. And we are yet to find out the outcome from that initiative and of SB 34. But I was involved in task forces back in the mid 90s when we came up with HB 295. And we had no incentive, no carrot or stick. And there was very little compliance. Well, by some cities there was, but by a lot of cities, compliance was haphazard. Now we have submission. Most looks like have complied. We'll find out what the outcome is. So that's very important. We got an introduction of the state with incentives. And then we had SB 39 last year, which did provide some funds. Unfortunately, did get cut back a little bit with the COVID special session. But that was the first time, I think, other than the homeless and ongoing Olene Walker, where we had some funds from the state. Resources are so important. And that's an area where the state can help and with financial resources. And we can talk more about those, maybe some of those possibilities, but I'll give it back to you, Terry.
Thank you. Ty, you have any thoughts?
I think it's great that the state, let out and started with SB 34. We are now at a spot where we can start to measure what's happening and whether or not the tools and the list of ideas that are being implemented and tried are having an effect. I think we're going to all look very eagerly to see whether the bar was set too low. We offered a range of alternatives to solve the problem at the local level in SB 34. And cities were not asked to do all of those, but to select a few. And so we'll have to see if there's a pattern to what was chosen and whether it's having the effect we want. I do wonder, whether or not the incentives and the consequences that Jim alluded to around transportation funding will be enough to be able to overcome, the political inertia that exists at the local level because of NIMBYism and other forces. So we'll have to see over the next year or so how that plays out. But I think that's probably the big question mark ahead.
Great, thank you. So in the last minute or two we have left, we've identified this as a problem. And if I'm a legislator and I'm sitting there and say, okay, I see we got a problem, we got to work on this thing. What's the low-hanging fruit? What can I do right now that may be of help as quickly as anything? I know a lot of these things are long-term play out deals, but what if any low-hanging fruit do we have in this process?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was talking about before, resources. And the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund has been funded at about $2 million for years. That needs to be enhanced and expanded, I believe. They provide a really important resource for affordable housing and financing for a lot of the housing that is done through tax credits. And so that's an important issue, and it's not that big of an obstacle, I don't think. Even if you double it, I mean, we go up to 4 million. That's pretty modest. Another another program that some states have adopted and we have looked at in the study from other states was the inventory of public assets by cities and counties and government entities, whether they might be a school district, whether do they have idle resources that is in the way of land. And most communities don't really understand their inventory or have an idea of the value of their unused land and their idle resources. Communities around the country are looking at that and then running some sort of analysis on what's the highest and best use of that land, and then joining with, as I referred to earlier, with a consortium of nonprofits, also a business community, and state government as well as local government to pull off production of new housing units that are more affordable on land that has been idle, maybe in many cases for years. So, some sort of legislation that would look at, take major cities, those are over 20,000 in population, ought to do an inventory. That's about 32 cities, ought to do an inventory of their public land. And then we can look at the highest and best use of that land. I think that's one important source that could really be helpful.
Great idea. Thank you. Senator Representative Ty, you're it. What do you get? Give me the low-hanging fruit. What you can grab?
Well, I think Jim's point about inventorying our land is a great idea. I think I would expand it to include not just the lands that the local governments own, but also the land that might be underutilized for a different purpose. We read about vacant shopcos. Ari put the slide up about some of these centers that are maybe going to stay dark for a very long time. I recognize the challenge, and I'm sure our local leaders who are doing some really good work in this space can speak to it. But I think we need to ultimately probably look at taxation because historically the way cities' budgets kind of work is you have quite a bit of housing that doesn't generate a lot of tax revenue, and you rely on a couple of really significant commercial uses to cover the rest of the cost of government. And we set up tax systems that sort of lock that in place and make it very hard to adapt and fund the role of government. So I do think understanding whether we're utilizing land to its fullest and whether or not we've given the right balance and tools to fund local government, and are the incentives to keep the Shopko box vacant in hopes that someday it'll be full again versus converting it to a mix of housing. Those are real decisions that cities have to make. And so I would encourage us to think more holistically about that.
Thank you very much. I'll vote for you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights today. Hopefully that's been helpful. My job is to turn the time over to Cameron for your role. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you everyone for your contribution thus far. My name is Cameron Deal, and I'm the Executive Director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and we represent cities across the state as at the Capitol and in halls of Congress, advocating for really the ability of mayors and council members to govern their communities. I am trying to share my screen here. Can people see that yet? Well, it's always part of the fun, right? My Zoom.
No, we can see it.
You can see it? Okay, it froze for me, so let's. All right, there it goes. It has reloaded for me. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to set up several of our elected officials who are league board members And we'll talk about specific projects in their communities around the state. The cities are planning for population growth in a variety of ways. I really appreciated participating in putting together the Gardner report, and I appreciate the recommendations that came out of it. Jim hit those 5. I do want to draw one key distinction as we have this conversation, and that is the issue of housing affordability and affordable housing. We often merge those two statements, but in actuality, they overlap, but they are independent. Housing affordability is that overall cost of housing compared to how much people make. Affordable housing is the access to housing for low and moderate income Utahns. And we really do have challenges in both fields, and they are related, but they also need different strategies.
Hey, Cameron.
Yes.
We are seeing your screen in presenter mode, so we can see the first slide and the next slide. If you want to just adjust so we can just see the one slide you're attempting to show, that'd be helpful for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about now?
Has not changed yet.
Interesting. On my Zoom screen, it shows me that it is. Let me re-share it. On my screen, it actually came up again. So give me 1 second. Okay, can you see this now?
It looks the same as it just looked a moment ago, but we can work through it if necessary.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not sharing properly, but be that as it may, the cities and the market both have keys to housing. Man, now my mouse is frozen. Well, welcome to 2021, right? I have an extension of 2020. So the cities have keys to housing. The keys that we hold are around planning and infrastructure, ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. What we don't hold, though, are the keys that are within the market. I'm just going to stop sharing in general so that now you can just see me. Hello again. So the keys that we do not hold are those market keys: the cost of land, the cost of materials, the labor shortage, the amount of money that our residents make, and whether or not incomes are keeping pace with the costs. We don't control the willingness of individuals to sell their homes and want to move. And we don't control speculation, but we do control land use planning, infrastructure, and those quality of life components. There have been several comments about residents and their concerns about growth. And there are a couple of key data points here for you to understand. Number one, we surveyed Utahns through Y2 Analytics, and 63% of Utahns felt like Utah was growing too quickly. That's a staggering number that should scare all of us as people in this field. 58% also told us that they trusted local government the most to plan for that type of growth. So local government leaders have both the responsibility, and the mandate, and they have the concerns from the residents as they try to balance the needs of today's residents and tomorrow's residents. Jim showed you the housing gap data, and it is important to recognize that in 2020, with 30,745 new units, we had the strongest year on record for new housing units. And interestingly, in 2019, 55% of those new housing units statewide were multifamily housing units, which again, we're looking at record numbers of new multifamily housing. So as we look at those five examples that the Gardner Policy Institute has identified, and the first one being land use, we're seeing that shift in how cities are planning their communities because of the demand. We commissioned a survey with the Utah Foundation a couple of years ago, and they found that 83% of cities actually allow higher density or land use for housing today than they did a decade ago. They also found that 76% of cities were concerned about road capacity and infrastructure capacity limiting growth. And this is really where the state government, local government, the business community, and all of us can work together, because housing and infrastructure go hand in hand. The concern from residents go down when the infrastructure accompanies the density. We also found through this Utah Foundation report that once adjusted for inflation between 2007 and 2018, that city impact fees for both single family and residential family housing has gone down. The other piece on the land use front is SB 34. Jim mentioned it earlier, and cities had the choice of 23 planning tools, and they had to select some of these tools in order to qualify for $700 million of the State Transportation Investment Fund. We did have 100% compliance in the first year, and we were proud of the fact that cities stepped up to do their part to comply with SB 34. The best practices that Jim referenced actually all are found within SB 34. So for example, one of the options was to preserve affordable housing. The state has a role in that with the Olene Walker Housing Fund. There are federal tax credits that are also available and heavily used. And 34 cities picked preservation as one of their SB 34 menu items. One of the big challenges with preservation comes from the market and gentrification, where you may have older, naturally occurring affordable housing stock whose underlying land can drive up the cost and lead to potential redevelopment. I actually lived through this a few years ago, and my wife and I were newly married, moved into an apartment building. I went up to an older lady who was watching us move in. I said, "I'm your future neighbor." And she said, "No, you're not. I have to leave because of people like you." I've never forgotten that lady, because she represents this struggle about preservation of affordable housing, redevelopment, gentrification, market forces, planning, all of these pieces coming together. Another tool that Jim referenced was redevelopment agencies. And we're proud to say that we have over 200 projects that are underway around the state, according to the report. And the infill development that Ty referenced often has its genesis from redevelopment agencies. Now, redevelopment agencies are dependent on local property tax. There's no state money involved with redevelopment agencies. But that's another potential opportunity for a partnership between state and local governments, is investing in these redevelopment areas to do the infill development. Ty, you mentioned Shopco, and my mind immediately went to Sugar House, where a one-time Shopco has now turned into a bustling village with a variety of housing units and a variety of other land uses. Another of the best practices was accessory dwelling units. 57 cities selected that in the first go-around, and since then, several other cities have selected ADUs and are working on ADU ordinances. Interestingly, that 51% of survey respondents to a recent ADU survey from Salt Lake County said that their biggest concern around enforcement on the ADUs was the owner-occupied piece, making sure that people still are living full-time in those neighborhoods. And 42% said it was managing parking. So this is that push and pull, where you recognize parking can be an obstacle to implementation, but parking is also a major issue for mitigating the potential negative impacts of growth. The other item that was referenced in the Gardner report is transit-oriented development. Go up and down the blue line, the green line, the red line on tracks, and you will see brand new housing units up and down those lines. 39 cities selected the option. They were required, actually, if they had transit, to select this option, to rezone for higher density near transit. Keep in mind that most transit in Utah is primarily funded by local sales tax. So again, this is another potential opportunity for state and local partnerships to fund that transit system. So in short, cities are planning for housing with the tools that we have. We welcome the partnership with the state, and my elected officials are now going to give you several examples. The role of cities really comes down to quality of life. We are in the quality of life business, public safety, land use, infrastructure, economic development, parks and recreation, and finding that balance and planning for the needs of today's residents and tomorrow's residents. So with that, Mayor Ramsey, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some specifics in beautiful South Jordan.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And hopefully what I have to share is some good news. You know, we've heard some staggering numbers, and we recognize, I think we all recognize that we have a significant need that's going to require all hands on deck. This is going to take all of us to provide enough housing for our own kids, for our growth that's taking place. It's happening, and we can work together to move the needle and still maintain quality of life here in the state of Utah. I want to thank Ty McCutcheon for being here and mentioning the numbers that we saw in Daybreak. It was a record year in Daybreak, which means it was a record year in South Jordan. And that's really saying something, because we've been growing for quite some time. So as we continue to grow, we're looking for all sorts of solutions. There's no one size fits all solution. So I appreciate Jim pointing out the different tools that we do have as cities, because we all know we cannot control the price of land. We can't control the increasing costs of materials, but there are tools that we have available to us. And we are really trying to use all of those tools in South Jordan to do our part to try to address this need. And so I just want to share with you really quickly an example of something that we did recently that we are in the process of working on, but we've been working closely with Ivory Homes. It's been a fantastic partnership. We really appreciate the chance to partner with Ivory Homes on the Bingham Court project in South Jordan, and trying to look outside the box at how to make any of the units in that development more affordable, because land in our city is expensive. We used RDA TIF funds to contribute upfront to help offset some of the infrastructure costs in putting that development in, and dedicated 9 of the townhomes in that project after changing the zoning on the land to allow for more units on the land, and working with the local neighbors and those in their existing homes that were surrounding this area that became really a redevelopment area. Working with them, they are excited about this project. They're thrilled with how it's turning out, and we didn't get pushback from them, but I think we worked hard with Ivory Homes. Ivory did a great job, and we as the city did everything we could to help people recognize the potential for a really great project and outstanding neighbors, because these 9 units, because of the RDA funds, we were able to put it in up front to buy down the infrastructure costs, now qualify as moderate income housing. And what we did was we dedicated those 9 units to our public employees who work either for the city or for our school district. And they get first right to those units. And the surrounding neighbors were thrilled at that. They would love to be able to have people who work in our city and our schools and work, our firefighters, police, to have them as neighbors and to have them be able to afford to live in the city that they work in and would like to live in, and to be able to buy a home for their family. The neighbors were excited about that, and we were grateful for that. These homes are going to be available if they are not initially put an offer on by our public employees. Then they'll have the opportunity to be sold to somebody else who qualifies under that median income housing requirement. However, Ivory will hold on to them for 30 days if an application is made, just in case one of the public employees decides to try to purchase the home. But it might sound like, well, 9 units, that's not a ton. Maybe not, but it's a big deal for those 9 families who are going to be able to buy a home, who are going to be able to qualify to buy a home, who wouldn't otherwise. And it is moving the needle. That is one very small example, but it's something that's not been done. It's a unique approach, and it's a partnership that really illustrates the success we can have when we use the tools available to us as cities and work together with the development community. I think there tends to be this prevalent mindset that, at least I hear, it's my perception, that there's this mindset that cities aren't on board. They don't care. They don't want to acknowledge the housing crisis, and I want you to know that I do not believe that that's the case. I think we have a lot of data that shows we're doing things all the time, really looking at what we can do. One of those things that we as officers of the Utah League of Cities and Towns are trying to do is to help educate other local elected officials about this need. A lot of people run for local public office because they don't like the growth, and then they get elected, and then there's a learning curve because they come into office because they don't want the reality of what we're up against. And so we're always trying to help educate, but please know this is something that matters to all of us as Utahns, and it's going to take all of us working together. We're very proud in South Jordan to be doing all that we're doing and to try to put these kind of projects. We have a robust TOD. We have a lot of projects, the town center that will go in Daybreak, as Ty was talking about, the growth in Daybreak will really bring together transit, transportation, housing. We have economic development that will go there. These things can be done well. Redevelopment can be done well, and we can move the needle. And so hopefully that just is a little bit of good news, that there is great work taking place, and we really are trying and doing the best we can, doing all we can. We appreciate the partnerships and look forward to continuing to work together to move the needle on this and try to come up with solutions. They are going to look different in every community, and that's okay. One size doesn't fit all, but there's a lot of options that we can figure out what's best for our own communities and those who live here, to make room for quality of life for the residents we have now and those that we'll have in the future. So thank you for the opportunity to share that. I appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over now to Mike Mendenhall. Mike is a council member in Spanish Fork, and he's the immediate past president of the league. So Mr. Mendenhall.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be really quick so I can pass this to Mayor Silvestrini of Mill Creek. But just a couple things in Spanish Fork. I'll beg Mayor Mendenhall of Salt Lake City her forgiveness for sharing this text with a large group today. But she just sent me a text this morning saying, passing through your lovely little city on our way to Moab and sending you well wishes. I want to share that simply because Mayor Mendenhall has been a great colleague in the Utah League of Cities and Towns. The diversity that exists from Salt Lake City down to St. George and everywhere in between, cities large and small, is a great organization. Just what Mayor Ramsey mentioned of the ability to share best practices and communicate with cities about what's working well in our cities. She said little city. The dichotomy of that is just yesterday having the discussion with my next door neighbor of their frustration that 8 years ago when they moved here, they loved the little city of Spanish Fork. Now they feel like it's grown up and it's too fast paced. It's too big and there's too many people. There's too many multifamily units that they think they're looking for somewhere else to go. We had a great discussion with that neighbor of a few things we're doing in Spanish Fork to obviously help be a partner in the housing affordability crisis, but continue to maintain that quality of life that people enjoy here in Spanish Fork. I'll tell you, the brought up by Jim, I believe, was looking at your inventory in your city and maybe that idle, he called them idle resources. In Spanish Fork just this last year, we did sell about 50 acres of ground to a large national home builder that 400 homes will be built on, multifamily development that'll be built there. And so that's a strategic location. So we make sure that when we're acting locally, we are thinking regionally with our neighbors like Springville and Mapleton, Payson, Elk Ridge, Woodland Hills. There's some communities where this one size fits all approach really won't work simply because putting a lot of density that's not close to the roads or to shopping will just cause that much more traffic, which I think starts to frustrate some people. So we're trying to really think outside the box in Spanish Fork, but also think regionally when we're acting locally. And that's just an example of one of the many things we're doing here in Spanish Fork, along with ADUs and a whole lot of other things mentioned that we're trying to help this. Mayor Silvestrini has some great examples too, and I'll pass it on to him.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Jeff Silvestrini. I'm the mayor of Mill Creek, Utah, which is a city of about 62,000 people immediately south of Salt Lake City, north of Holiday, and bordering with Murray and South Salt Lake and Taylorsville and West Valley. So we're in the middle of the valley, and we're a built-out city pretty much. But we do have lots of opportunities for redevelopment. Unfortunately, our community was built without much planning. And we do have a lot of those commercial corridors lined with strip malls, and some of them are obsolete, past their prime, vacant. And so we've had some opportunities for redevelopment, and in fact, we're forging ahead with a pretty exciting city center plan where the city has committed about $20 million to acquire a plaza strip through this area that will be lined with multifamily housing, mixed-use development, commercial, and probably we currently have about 800 units actually under construction in that area, and with the potential for as many as about 2,000 to 2,500 units at build out. We are exploring the possibility of locating a new city hall on that as well. So that's an exciting development in Mill Creek. We also have exciting things going on our west side where the Trax line runs through for a period of space between South Salt Lake and Murray. So, but what I want to kind of talk about is, in order to accomplish all of these things and kind of keep the lid on the public clamor is one of the biggest challenges that we have in local government. Our job is to listen to our residents, and our job is to plan for growth, but to do it in a way that preserves the quality of life that that attracts people to our communities and to our state. So that's always a balancing act between private property rights on one hand and the interest in their community of preserving what they think they have. And we've seen, instances in our state of referenda that come up when people are not happy and maybe you go too far. So we do have to balance that. And I think we've done a good job of that in my city, and we've done we've been studious about public engagement, about listening to people, and about working with the development community and shaping our ordinances to try to find middle ground between accommodating growth on one hand and doing what we need to do with respect to transportation, avoiding congestion, improving air quality by allowing more density, and also making sure that the neighborhoods that we're trying to protect feel secure. And I'm going to put in the chat here something. I'm also this year the president of WFRC. I want to share a resource that they put together, which is a public engagement guide, which is actually quite a remarkable document about best practices in public engagement. And while I don't think that the Mill Creek Council or our Planning Commission read this guide before we've launched into what we've been doing, a lot of the things that we have done are consistent with this. And I think it's a good guide to look at for both public policymakers and also for the development community to kind of understand that this is a process that we need to honor, and we need to listen to people in order to get buy-in and help everyone understand the growth problem that we have. I like to talk about how the fact that the growth problem is not people, 2/3 of it is our own kids, right? It's making room in our communities for our own children, in addition to the outside growth that we're fortunate to have. But I think it's important to educate and to also demonstrate that we have a plan. And I know that Andrew Gruber in a minute is going to talk about this more perhaps, but the Wasatch Front Regional Council, which is a collaboration of local government leaders from our region, from Box Elder County to Salt Lake County, Tooele, Morgan, Davis, and Weber. It's local government leaders coming up with a plan, and we've formulated a plan called Wasatch Choice 2050, which basically allows for the creation of areas, nodes of density, more density in areas where it can be accommodated with transit infrastructure, with good transportation, and then connect those areas with transit so that people can get out of their cars and not have to use them, ride a bike, walk. It's actually a good blueprint. And I think if we show our communities that we're growing with a plan, and that there's a prospect for them getting something out of it, like the new park plaza that we're building in Mill Creek, that actually some developers are helping to fund in terms of the negotiations we've done with them to get it off the ground, that we can handle this growth in Utah. And we need to make room for all different housing types. Multifamily isn't the only answer. But I also think it's important to recognize that every community is different. And I know, Mill Creek is considering an ADU ordinance, but I'll tell you that, even that needs to be balanced, because there are some communities where there are unique situations where too much on-street parking is going to create other problems with respect to removal of snow in the summer on the benches and things like that. So it's just important to to listen to our citizens and to let local government leaders who actually know our communities best design some of these policies. And yeah, we get that there's growth pressure, and we're doing everything we can to plan and accommodate for it, because we know that our quality of life depends upon that good planning. So with that, I'll introduce Andrew Gruber, who's the Executive Director of Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Thank you very much, Mayor Silvestrini. And what I get to do now is conclude this panel discussion and try to pull together some of the themes that we've heard. And what I want to do in order to try to do that is to take us up to a 30,000 foot level, almost literally here, and show you what Mayor Silvestrini mentioned, which is the Wasatch Choice vision. The heart of this starts really with what Ari said at the very beginning, that Utah is growing. We're the fastest growing state in the nation over the last decade. And so we know we cannot take our quality of life for granted. The kids that we want to keep here and not have them move away, being an appealing place for others moving into our state because of that high quality of life. We can't take it for granted. But the good news is that we do have a plan. We refer to that as the Wasatch Choice vision. And the point is that even as we look ahead decades into the future, all the way out to 2050 for our children and our grandchildren, we know that the decisions that we make today in our individual communities affect that future. So this vision that was put together jointly by many organizations, the cities and the counties, UDOT and UTA, the chambers of commerce and the universities, with tons of public engagement, like Ari said, is so important, really reflects that shared vision for where we want to go as a community. And it's based on 4 key strategies. And they're listed here, you can see them: providing transportation choices, supporting housing options, what we've been talking about, what Jim talked about making sure that we're responding to market demand and allowing for greater choices in housing. Then preserving open space, which, you know, we have this unparalleled natural beauty in our community, the mountains that we love so much. And we have to preserve that and also make sure that we have park space and open space woven right into the heart of our communities. And then finally, linking decisions. Economic development, transportation, and housing have to be thought about holistically. So let's just dive down a little bit here, and I'll show you, you can, and all of this, by the way, is available. You all can take a look at all of this information. It's all live on our website. And so Mayor Ramsey was talking about South Jordan. Mayor Silvestrini was talking about Mill Creek. Councilmember, I'm not going to go south to Utah County right now, but it's all on the map. But what you'll see, and actually let me just pull out just a little bit here. What you can see is you can recognize the relationship between development areas, land use, and transportation. And in fact, if you turn off the transportation and you just look at the land use, what you see, these are neighborhood centers and town centers. In Mill Creek, what Mayor Silvestrini was talking about, the Daybreak area in South Jordan that Mayor Ramsey was talking about. Well, the plan contemplates coordinating those with our transportation. So if we build these nodes of density along the tracks line, if we plan for more development along future high capacity transit, we're better able to absorb that growth. And then of course we coordinate development as well with the roadway system and provide active transportation, biking options as well. So when you look at this, you can tell that relationship between transportation and housing. What you also notice is that the majority of land is actually, and this is true for Mayor Ramsey's city of South Jordan, it's single family detached residential. That's because there's no one size fits all that makes sense in the housing market. What we have to do, as Jim said, and Ty said, and Terry, we have to provide choices that respond to the market. If we can do this, if we can provide choices, if we can have mixed use centers that are coordinated with our nodes of transportation, we're not only responding to the market, but we're allowing people to live more close to transit so that they have an option of not driving. That relieves pressure on our roads and helps with our air quality. If we have people that they can live and work and play in a center, then maybe they can walk to work or to school, and they can live more of their life in a closer area and not have to do so much traveling if they don't want to. That helps with affordability, combination between housing and transportation. And then by having that centered mixed use development, it actually preserves the character of those existing suburban or rural communities like we were just talking about. So as we think about this broader picture from the region, I'll conclude this by saying, and as a reminder, that we can't look at one piece in isolation. We can't just look at housing or transportation or land use or economic development. We collectively, the public sector, the private sector, property owners, government officials, we need to work together and think about the relationship of all of these issues. Now, our focus today has been on growth and on housing. We're going to conclude today, but with a reminder that next week, we're going to focus on growth and transportation. So 1 week from today, from 12 to 1 o'clock, we'll have another panel of folks that are going to talk with us about what the primary needs are in transportation. And I'd also note, of course, that as these issues are being discussed during the heart of the legislative session, they are relevant to issues being discussed today: housing policy, tax policy, transportation. We hope that the information we've provided today and that we provide next week will be helpful to policymakers and to legislators as you think about what we all want, which is providing great quality of life for Utah's communities now and in generations to come. So we're going to drop this information into the chat about the Wasatch Choice. If any of you want to take a look at that now, we're in preparation for next week. And on behalf of the Salt Lake Chamber, Envision Utah, the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and the Wasatch Front Regional Council, thank you all for your participation and for the work you're doing on behalf of our communities. And we'll see you next week.